Continue.
Everyone. So continuing with the previous lecture, that is antenatal care, we're going to talk about the second part of this antenatal care.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? So first is the abdominal examination. Now, what are the preliminaries of abdominal examination are that you should always take a verbal consent from the patient. The patient is asked to evacuate her bladder. She should be put in a dorsal position with her thighs slightly flexed and flexion at the knee joint and thighs to be slightly abducted. Now this relaxes the abdominal muscles. Abdomen is fully exposed and the examiner stands on the right side of the patient. Now, what are the steps? First is the inspection, then the palpation, and then the auscultation. Now, on inspection, we have to see whether the uterine ovoid is longitudinal or transverse or oblique. What is the contour of the uterus? Whether there is any fundal notching, convex or flattened anterior wall, cylindrical or spherical shape, size of the uterus, skin conditions of the abdomen, or any incisional scar mark on the abdomen. So any incision on the abdomen, even if the patient has not given history of any surgery, you can get back to the patient and ask her regarding the scar mark. And the type of scar mark you can usually make out whether it is because of a previous cesarean or any other abdominal surgery. Then you go ahead with the palpation. If it's a cold weather, always warm your hands before palpation. Should not be done when the uterine contractions are present. Wait for the uterus to relax so that you know exactly what you are palpating. And conduct this examination with utmost gentleness to avoid undue uterine irritability. Because once the uterus gets irritable, the Braxton Hicks contractions will start and you will not be able to know what is happening in the different grips when you are doing the palpation. Now the next step is the abdominal girth. You measure around the abdomen at the level of the umbilicus. Now what is the significance of this abdominal girth? You measure it with a measuring tape and this girth increases by about 2.5 centimeters per week beyond 30 weeks and at term measures about 95 centimeter to 100 centimeter. So this indirectly tells you if the growth of the fetus is normal or if there is intrauterine growth retardation. Now coming on to the palpation, you note down the height of the uterus, that is the symphysiofundal height. The uterus is to be centralized if it is deviated to one side. The ulnar border of the left hand is placed on the uppermost level of the fundus and an approximate duration of pregnancy is ascertained in terms of weeks of gestation. Now this is precisely how you do. You can see the ulnar border of your hand and with dipping movements, you see the fundal height and how to divide the weeks in gestation that we have talked about in previous lecture. Now this is noting down the abdominal girth which I've just told you. Then another thing you need to do with the measuring tape is you measure the symphysiofundal height and this is again measured in centimeters. After 24 weeks, the distance in centimeter corresponds to the gestation in weeks. A variation of 1 to 2 centimeters is acceptable. So if it is 28 centimeters, the gestation is 28 weeks and this is valid only after 24 weeks of gestation. Now, these are the conditions where the uterine height is more than the normal or the uterine height is lower than the normal. Now, when it is more than the normal, the patient does not remember her dates. There is a mistaken date of LMP. It's a twin pregnancy. It may be more of liker, that is polyhydramnios. The baby size would be big. In addition to the baby, there is some pelvic tumor which has increased the height, the hydatid form mole, the concealed accidental hemorrhage. All these are causes of height more than period of gestation. Now, where is the height less than the period of gestation? First is again the mistaken dates of LMP. Then less of liker or scanty liker may be oligohydramnios or anhydramnios. In cases of fetal growth retardation, intrauterine fetal death, and another one I would like to add is in cases of oblique or transverse lie, because the uterine ovoid is not longitudinal in that case. It has grown transversely and the height will be less than period of amenorrhea. Now coming on to obstetric grips, these are known as the Leopold maneuvers. First is the fundal grip, which is also known as first Leopold. Second is the lateral or umbilical grip, that is second Leopold. Third is Pollex grip, that is third Leopold. And fourth is pelvic grip, which is the fourth Leopold. Now, this is what is the fundal grip. Now, this tells us which pole is present at the level of the fundus. In a normal cephalic presentation, it is the breech which is felt in the fundal grip, and you describe it as broad, non-bilotable, soft to firm, irregular breech. In contrast to a breech presentation where the head would be lying in the fundal grip, and then you say that it is a round, globular, bilotable head felt. Then coming on to the lateral grips, again the palpation is done by facing the patient's face. The hands are to be placed flat on either side of the umbilicus to palpate one after the other the sides and the front of the uterus. And this will tell you the position of the back, the limbs and the anterior shoulder. So when you feel a smooth curved back on one side and small knobby fetal parts which are nothing but limbs on the other side. Now, this is the lateral grip. You do simultaneously with both hands and it tells you where is the fetal back, limbs and the anterior shoulder. Obviously, the anterior shoulder is in continuation with the spine of the fetus. Now, again, this is the lateral grips. You can see that the examiner is facing the patient and doing the lateral grips. Now, coming on to the pelvic grip, this is you do with two hands and you are facing the patient's feet. 4 fingers of both the hands are placed on either side of the midline in the lower pole of the uterus and parallel to the inguinal ligament of that side. Then the fingers are pressed downwards and backwards in a manner of approximation of fingertips to know the presentation. So one, it will tell the presentation, and secondly, if the head is engaged or say the presenting part is engaged, you cannot go beneath the presenting part. Your hands will not converge, they will diverge, showing you that the presenting part is free and is not yet engaged. Instead of word free, I would use non-engaged. Now this is the way you're doing. You're facing the feet of the patient and you have placed your 4 fingers and on both sides parallel to the inguinal ligaments. You're palpating what is down there in the podalic pole, and you also need to know whether the whatever is in the podalic pole has got engaged or is still non-engaged. Now it tells you the precise presenting part. The cephalic prominence is carefully palpated and its relation to the limbs and back is noted. The cephalic prominence, being the sinciput, is placed on the same side towards which the limbs lie. And attitude we talked about in detail, all the definitions last time. We note the relative position of the sinciput and the occiput. Now this will tell you whether the attitude of flexion of the head is maintained or not. Now this is showing the head. Now in a well-flexed head, in the first diagram, the sinciput is placed at a higher level as compared to the in the reflex state. Both the poles remain at the same level. So in the second diagram, you can see that the occiput and sinciput are at the same level. And in the first, the sinciput is lower than the occiput. Now this is showing the engagement in the pelvic grip. You see that your hands are diverging, your fingers are diverging if the head is going deep down into the pelvis. And you can see your fingers can be converged beneath the presenting point if the presenting part is non-engaged. Then coming on to the pollex grip. Now you face towards the patient's face. Overstretched thumb and four fingers of the right hand are placed over the lower pole of the uterus, keeping the ulnar border of the palm on the upper border of the symphysis pubis. Now, when the fingers and the thumb are approximated, the presenting part is grasped distinctly if not engaged, and also the mobility from side to side is tested. And this mobility is called pilotability, which is so very prominent in cases of vertex presentation or cephalic lies. Then coming on to the auscultation, you hear the distinct fetal heart sounds. This not only helps in the diagnosis of a live baby, but its location of maximum intensity can resolve doubt about the presentation of the fetus. So you know that if the back is thrown back, the fetal heart will be heard anteriorly, and if the face is present posteriorly, then you can feel that the fetal heart is heard distant, like in occipitosacral positions. Now, if it is a breech or a transverse lie, you will hear the fetal heart near the umbilicus or just below the umbilicus, in contrast to the fetal heart heard in the vertex presentations, which will be present on the spino-umbilical line. Now, you can hear the fetal heart with the stethoscope. We use a Doppler nowadays, and this is the old one, the fetoscope, which is sometimes kept in your exam and you're not able to identify it. This is known as Pinard's fetoscope. Now, this is a Doppler, right? This doctor is hearing the fetal heart with the help of a Doppler. Now, on auscultation, the fetal hearts are best audible through the back, that is the left scapular region of the fetus, in vertex and breech presentation, where the convex portion of the back is in contact with the uterine wall. In face presentation, the heart sounds are heard through the fetal chest. The maximum intensity of fetal heart is below the umbilicus in cephalic presentation and around the umbilicus in breech presentation. You can imagine, according to the presence of the position of the heart in each of these presentations, the maximum intensity will be heard there only. Now, this is the location of the fetal heart. RSP stands for right sacroposterior, left sacroposterior, then left sacroanterior, right sacroanterior. These are the presentations where the fetal heart will be heard a little high up. These are the breech presentations. Now, these are the positions in the breech presentation. Then we come on to the occipitoposterior positions, that is the right occipitoposterior, left occipitoposterior. You can hear the fetal heart in the flanks. Then right occipitoanterior, left occipitoanterior, and right midline anterior, LMA, all these will be a little towards the midline. In occipito-anterior position, the fetal heart is located in the middle of the spino-umbilical line, as I have shown you. In occipito-lateral position, it is heard more laterally. In occipito-posterior position, well back towards the mother's flank on the same side. Now, this is how we do the first maneuver, that is the fundal grip. You can see the second maneuver and you can see the hands, how they are being placed. You are facing the patient, and then lower down you can see in the third grip that you are facing the patient's feet and using both hands to grip the presenting part. And then in the fourth grip, you're again facing the patient's face and you're trying to grip the fetal part in your single hand. Now, lie. What do we infer from all this? The longitudinal lie is evident. The longitudinal lie gives a uterine ovoid on inspection. The poles of the fetal ovoid are cephalic and podalic are placed, one at the lower and other at the upper part of the cavity, as is evident from the fundal and the first pelvic ribs. So both of these will tell you what is the lie, whether it is a cephalic or whether it is a podalic. Now the cephalic presentation is evident from the first pelvic rib, smooth, hard globular head, attitude from the first pelvic rib, the relative positions of the sinciput and occipital poles are determined. I've showed you the diagrams to make it more clear. You need to know the position of the occiput. Now on inspection, the convexity of the uterine contour you see. On lateral grips, the back is placed not far from the midline to the same side of the occiput, and the anterior shoulder is near the midline. On auscultation, maximum intensity of fetal heart is close to the spino-umbilical line on the same side of the back. This is true for all normal presentations. Now, right or the left position is to be determined by the position of the back, whether it is present on the left side or right side, position of the occiput, and the location of the fetal heart on the same side of the back. Now, when the greatest horizontal plane, the biparietal, has passed the plane of the pelvic rim, the head is said to be engaged. We talked about the definitions last time. Now, in first pelvic rib, both the poles, that is the sinciput and the occiput, are not felt per abdomen. Divergence of the examining fingers of both hands occurs because of the engaged head. And in the second pelvic rib, the head is non-velatable or non-mobile, which indicates that the head has engaged. Now, descent of the head by abdominal assessment. So you do a 5-finger method to know the descent of the head. Can you see? In first diagram, you can place the 5 fingers above the symphysis pubis in the midline, and you can feel the head. And in the other one, you can just put 2 fingers above. So this is how you correlate it. The red line shows the pelvic rim. So whole of the head is above, it is floating above the bib. It is known as 5 by 5. A little bit on the brim, it is 4 by 5. Even at 3 by 5, it is not engaged. Just engaged, 2 by 5. 1 by 5 is engaged, and 0 by 0 is deeply engaged. And when do you know by PV examination? You know by PV examination that the presenting part is lying at the level of the 0 station or ischial spine, and no more head is palpable per abdomen. Now this is the per vaginum examination you do with 2 fingers, your index finger and your middle finger of the right hand. First trimester, it is done for the first time before 12 weeks. The purpose is to diagnose the pregnancy, collaborate the size of the uterus with the period of amenorrhea, and exclude any pelvic pathology. Now, if there is any previous history of abortion, refrain from doing it, so it is a contraindication. And occasional vaginal bleeding, if present in the present pregnancy, again, do not do a PV examination and get an ultrasound examination done to know the fetal viability. Now, it is done for the first time before 12 weeks in the first trimester. Firstly, to diagnose pregnancy. This is the same slide which I've shown you earlier. Now, the steps are, before doing a PV examination, always explain the procedure to the patient. You always ask her to empty her bladder, put her in a dorsal position with thighs flexed and buttocks placed on the foot end of the table, and tell her to move down towards the foot end of the table, that is to come to the edge of the table on the foot end. Drape the patient, maintain privacy, hand washing, and wear surgical gloves on your right hand. Then you start with inspection. You separate the labia using thumb and index finger and assess the character of the vaginal discharge. Assess if there is any cystocele or uterine prolapse present, and ask her to bear down or cough if she has any bowel movements. Palpate the Bartholin gland for any infection. After that, do a speculum examination. We use a bivalve speculum. Inspect cervix for position. You see whether it is central, color of the cervix, lesions, ulcerations, discharge. And we talked about the importance of the color of the cervix as an important sign of early pregnancy, and also the sign of pregnancy with the bluish discoloration of vagina, what we call as Jacquemin's sign. Now, pap smear is taken in case of discharge, and cervical os, that is nulli gravida, it is round and small. In a multiparous, it is slit-like, dividing the os into anterior and posterior lip. Now, in a bimanual examination, again, we did it for eliciting the Heger's sign and other signs. You introduce the index and the middle finger of the right hand in the vagina, and left hand is placed suprapubically. And you note the cervical consistency, direction, and pathology, uterus size, shape, position, and consistency. Adnexa, any mass felt through the fornix, includes ovarian cysts, enlarged fallopian tube, and also to elicit the Heger's sign, as I told you before. Now, this is the bimanual examination being done. Your right hand fingers inside the vagina, and there you are just above the symphysis pubis, and you elicit the Heger's sign. Now, in late pregnancy, the objective of doing a PV examination is to assess the pelvis, whether this pelvis is adequate for the delivery of this particular baby. Now, the timing is any time beyond 37th week. It is informative only if done with the beginning of the labor or just before the induction of labor. Now you feel the sacrum, which is smooth, well curved, and usually inaccessible beyond lower three pieces. So you can just feel up to first lower three pieces. You cannot access it. That is, the lower three pieces fall back. And if the AP diameter is less, you can feel the sacral promontory. Now the sacrosciatic notch is sufficiently wide so that you can place two fingers easily on it over the sacrospinous ligament covering the notch. The ischial spines are usually smooth, everted, and difficult to palpate. Now, if they are inverted, they are jutting inwards, very prominent, the interischial diameter is reduced, then you should think twice about allowing the vaginal delivery. And both the ischial spines are tipped simultaneously. Then the iliopectineal lines. This is the anterior or the forepelvis, which is to be palpated, and you need to note for any beaking suggestive of narrow forepelvis, because that will be the waist space of Morrison and will not be utilized by the head while negotiating the pelvis. Now, this is how you go about seeing the sacrum. You can see the curves. Second diagram, placing the two fingers on the sacrospinous ligament, palpating the sacrosciatic notch. Then the next diagram down below is, you can see the ischial spine. So you palpate one side, then on the other side, make out whether they are prominent or where they are jutting inside, and then open your fingers wide and try to tip both of them simultaneously. So if you are not able to do that, that means the pelvis seems to be adequate. And this is, you turn your fingers inside and you are palpating the iliopectineal line, and you can see the roundedness anteriorly. But if there is peaking, then you should start thinking. Now the side walls are palpated by sweeping the fingers unless convergent. Posterior surface of the symphysis pubis is normally a smooth rounded curve. Presence of angulation or beaking suggests abnormality. Then the sacrococcygeal joint. Down below, it's mobile, and the presence of hooked coccyx, if any, is to be noted, because during labor, second stage of labor, the coccyx goes back and the baby is delivered. And if the coccyx is fixed or ankylosed, then there may be difficulty in the outlet when the baby is delivered per vagina. Now, when you come down below the pubic arch, before you remove the fingers, try to accommodate the palmar aspect of your two fingers. The diagonal conjugate is the distance between the lower border of the symphysis pubis to the midpoint on the sacral promontory. For practical purpose, if the middle finger fails to reach the promontory or touches it with difficulty, That means your conjugate diameter is adequate. So that is all for today, and we will continue with the antenatal care in the next class. Recording. नहीं नहीं